Hi, fans,
Welcome
viewers, listeners,
to
countrymen, countrywomen. Welcome to We're Not Fine. So, yeah, this is a difficult topic. I think a lot of people who are obviously in therapy have emotionally abusive experiences growing up in one way or another, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a relative, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach, whether it's whatever. There's a lot of different circumstances. And these do have impacts on us. And we're going to cover the variety of ways that this might show up in your life if you've had that experience. And again, I also want to say as a caveat, every time we have these conversations, there is a way to change. There is a way to work through this. And there's a way to not, again, personalize that experience and let it impact your life in the way that it does for a lot of us.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
Okay, first way that we might be noticing in our real time lives that it's a manifestation of emotional abuse in our childhood is if everything that goes wrong or every fight we have, we blame ourselves. That if someone's angry at us or if someone's rude to us or if someone says horrible things to us or if they blame us, we also believe that it must be us. Like it always must be us. And when you're a child, it's actually surprisingly a really adaptive coping strategy because the world seems 1,000 times scarier if your parent is unhinged and not okay and unsafe. The one person or the people that you depend on to be secure, not abandoning, not punishing, loving you unconditionally. So if we tell ourselves like we're bad and we're making them act badly, I know it doesn't make any sense on the surface, but it somehow protects us from the idea that the world is really terrifying and unsafe and unfair. So that we think like, well, if I can fix myself, then our relationship will be better. What do you think about Zeus?
I think there's a lot of ways of looking at this. I think you blame yourself for others' bad behavior. One of the things that is so striking to me is that, there are adults who feel responsible for their parents' behaviors. And that's really, at the end of the day, what I think about this. I think it's very sad. As a kid, you have no control. You have no ability to have that control. And so many kids try to take care of their parents in almost an adultified way, really out of developmental sequence. And that means you're not allowed to be a kid, which again has this ramification and implication that, you are missing some developmental strategies that as an adult, you're going to, have to address and deal with so that you know how those are showing up in your life. But it's rough. Like when your parent makes you responsible for themselves, or you end up taking care of them while they're drunk, or taking care of them while they're doing other stuff that is destructive, or they're depressed or anxious and laying in bed. I've heard those stories so many times. As long as you know that it's not about you, and ideally that parent is able to own their emotional experience, I think people can do better. But it is tough because you automatically take responsibility.
Right. And I'm assuming the parent isn't going to own their part in it. But you can own that maybe it was a maladaptive coping strategy to feel like, oh, it must have been me.
Yeah.
And if you're noticing some of those behaviors in your relationship now, it's okay to notice accurately when your partner is actually the stinker in that moment. You don't always have to be the cause of all of it. Like, look at things a little more accurately, even if it feels scary.
Well, and therapy becomes a place for people to get that mirror.
Yeah.
And, it's really interesting. I've had a lot of people say, I'm not going to blame my parents for my circumstance. And I'm like, you probably will by the end of this therapy if you continue to
Well,
work with me.
And even like
Because
it's an explanation and not an excuse.
oh, absolutely. And you don't necessarily, it's not always that you have to confront your parent. Some
Right.
people choose to do that. I think it's a healthy thing to do if you can. But oftentimes I'll have people write letters, for example, that they don't send or that they'll burn, but that at least they get to have those feelings out and
I
they get
like
to
that.
express them in a way that's healthy and happy and
I like
adaptive.
that idea a lot because
Yep.
most times people are the way they are because their parent would have never in a million years have had the skills or capacity to sit with the person's grievances. So
Yep.
I like that idea that like get it out of your system, but you might not have a satisfying conversation with your parent.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I just want to add on to this. How many people who want their kids to have a relationship with their grandparents so they
Mm,
accommodate those bad behaviors? They don't address those bad behaviors. And I'll tell you, I think that's bullshit as well. I think unless there's a healthy dynamic, why would you expose your kids to a person who doesn't take responsibility and probably will treat them the same way they treated you? And I can't tell you how many times people have been like, okay, yes, I have seen my parent treat my kid badly too. So I need to, ideally you figure out to do something different. Lots of ideas on that, guys and gals. So number 2, you exhibit self-destructive behaviors. What's interesting about this is that we talk about different attachment styles. And again, I go back to if your feelings were not affirmed, if your experience emotionally was not safe to experience as a child, you are likely going to develop an avoidant attachment style, which means that the idea of letting yourself be vulnerable to people and take risks and be emotionally expressive in a relationship that really does create a secure attachment
mm,
is probably not going to happen. And so you do all kinds of fucked up shit to make sure that those relationships don't happen. You might sabotage by cheating. You might sabotage by using substances in a maladaptive way. You might disappear. You might do whatever it is, risky sex or whatever it is. Like you do things that are self-sabotaging because of your self-esteem. And I think there's that internalization that I talked about before is the key there. If you're constantly being negatively or criticized for your emotions, negatively impacted or criticized or responded to, I just think we have an inevitable kind of internalization of that. And we don't necessarily trust our own experience emotionally to be expressed safely to anybody. And
And
what a great opportunity is in therapy to do that with
it
someone that will
really
take it.
is. I
Yeah,
mean, that's my favorite work to be doing. And
agreed.
also, like, oftentimes what people will say about substances or people who are sex addicts or people who are just numbing out, the issue isn't really the addiction, it's an inability to sit with the big feelings. Like, if you feel like every time you feel something scary or vulnerable or unpleasant, you're just crawling out of your skin. Right.
Right.
Or maybe it's also associated with when you were little and you felt a big feeling, something horrible happened, like you were punished or abandoned, then yeah, you're going to lean into all of the self-sabotage and numbing out and compartmentalization. It's
Yeah.
rough.
It is rough.
Next, this is another sign that, okay, now what do I do about it? If you find yourself as an adult still feeling so much anger towards your parents that hasn't been dealt with and it's just bubbling to the surface, this angst every time you think about them or you wish you felt differently about them, it is really possible that it's unresolved. I mean, it's probable that it's unresolved and that might be something that you need to pay attention to. And as an adult, if you want to have healthy relationships with your own kids, with your partner, with your parents, if it's possible, you might need to actually address that unresolved rage, figure out what that was about. And you might need to decide that you're going to forgive them, even if there's no satisfying outcome of a conversation. Or sometimes forgiving someone means you give up on the possibility that you're ever going to have a real authentic connection.
Right.
So forgiving is actually the closure of like, I'm completely writing you off as a potential authentic relationship. So now we just talk about the weather and eat pie together once a year.
So inevitably, almost 100% of the time, I will explore with people who have this experience, like, have you let your parent know what your experience was? And a lot of people will say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't think they're going to respond well. And again, as I said before, I might find other ways for people to express that, whether that's within the appointment, whether that's in a letter that they're not going to send, whether that's doing it via email. There's lots of ways of addressing that. Um, I remember I did my own work on this with my therapist, and I did let my parent know, my mother know in particular, that, I don't think they were meant to be a parent. I'm grateful for my life, but I think motherhood was something that they may not have chosen because they weren't great at it overall. Of course, there were good times. Of course, there were not good times. But overall, I had a lot of recovery to do as an adult, and still do, by the way. I
Yeah.
still make those decisions. But the anger that you hold, I remember having the opportunity to let my mom know. And she opened the door by saying, was I really that bad a parent? Talking about actually a relationship issue with my sister.
You're like,
And I thought,
actually,
I'm going to take that opportunity. And I remember calling my therapist, like, I did it. I let her know. But, I'm going to be honest, my mother had no clue what I was talking about. She could not internalize that. She could not process it. And so I encourage everybody to know, you might let your parent know that this happened to get some of that anger and rage out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to respond well. But that's not about you. I call it a mucky ball. Like if somebody gives you a mucky ball and it's like just stuff that makes you feel anxious and icky and distressed, give it back to where it belongs. And your parent has to,
I like it.
give it back to your parent. If they did not do their work, if they remain depressed or anxious or dysregulated or didn't do their own work on their own abusive history, which I must tell you is oftentimes the case.
Oh, yeah.
I would just say, by all means, make sure that they are given that ball back. You don't have to carry that in this life. They may not take it back willingly. They may not accept it. They may not understand why it is that you're doing that. But that's not about them. It's about you and your recovery and being clean of that debris.
I like that. I like the mucky. I like the debris. And I also think about like, if you're listening to this and you're at the part of the intergenerational sort of generational cycle of trauma and abuse and unhealthy coping strategies, and you are worried that your children or adult children might be harboring some really deep seated rage and resentment towards you, one thing, if you are brave enough, is to actually check in with your kids. I know it sounds terrifying, but just to, even if you're in active parenting, even if your kids are, I don't know, teenagers or growing up or just out of the house, even to just say like, how can I be a better parent to you? Or do you have any unmet needs? Or are you craving a certain type of parenting that I haven't been able to give you? Or if you had to think of one way I could be a better parent to you, what would it be? It's kind of scary to think about, right? But my God, don't we wish our parents had asked us?
I also think, out of fairness, we all start parenting with the best intention. I don't think any of us say we're going to really fuck up this kid.
Right.
But I think when we parent, we inevitably make mistakes. There is no perfect parent. There is no perfect solution in a situation like this. So I love that idea. And I think, just really being open and honest as a parent and asking your kids. I always tell people to do it at 18 when they leave home so that nothing is kind of left as they go to college or they move out or whatever.
I thought you were going to say, so no one could actually give you feedback that you can use anymore. And you're like, bye.
No, here's the problem with it. It didn't happen at 18 for my kids. It happens later. Like as they start to explore
At 30.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think in your 30s is where a lot of that will kind of come to fruition as you kind of have some of the life experience at 18 when you're like running out into the world and going to college and the excitement of all of that. It's not a time where you're thinking, here's a bad part of my childhood, but you recognize it when you start to build relationships, have your own family, etc. Another way that this manifests is that you have never received your parents' affirmation and validation, and so you continue, even in adulthood, to seek their approval. You'll brag about what your kids are doing. You'll brag about the success you have in your occupation, how much money you make. You'll take them out to a nice dinner. You'll keep wanting to get their approval because they never quite give it to you. And that's what an emotionally abusive parent oftentimes represents, is the lack of validation and the lack of affirmation for who you are as a person. So you're always striving to get that affirmation. I think one of the pieces that is incredibly striking to me about this issue too, is that it's hard for kids from an emotionally abusive household to really just feel free to live their honest life. like whether that's about sexuality or gender or where they want to live or what they want to do, or whether they want to do something that they think their parents would disapprove of. Like, instead of being a professional, if you wanted to be in a different discipline, or you wanted to, um, I have a delightful client who has a high level of education, who's in retirement, and they might want to be a locksmith. And I'm like, I am fascinated by this.
Like,
It's
do
just,
it. Go for
do it. It's so great. That's not about their parents' approval, but the reality is the goal is to live an honest life. The goal is to be who you are. It doesn't matter what you are. Your parents should be really proud of you and just incredibly excited and happy to have you in their life. So that's what I find myself thinking, is people are still looking for that approval by, again, education, or I think there's this, I can't remember what insurance company it is. It's Progressive probably, where the guy's like, it has Flo and all of that gang. And he's like playing football and he goes, Dad, that's your dream. I want to go sell insurance. And I'm like, I love that. I love that
Oh my
commercial, because
God,
it's really
that's
about this guy
hilarious.
saying, I'm not going to do what my father needs me to do to be proud. I'm going to do what is good for me. And hopefully he'll be proud of me for what that is.
Well, and I'm thinking of this one example in
Yeah.
my own life. And also I wonder if there are cultural pieces of it, like family from the old country, or just a really, like, my mom, our family is in Israel. We're the only ones here. And of course, in America, all she wanted was for me to marry a nice Jewish doctor. But instead, I became one and married a handsome, tall, blonde Christian guy. But I remember I was like 40 years old, 2 kids, my own home, before I was brave enough to put up the blue and white stockings by the hearth, because we were supposed to only be raising our kids Jewish. And I was so afraid of what my mom was going to think that at 40 years old, I would take them down every time she was going to come over and make our house look extra Hanukkah-y. And now, I didn't give her enough credit, because she was like, oh, I already know that you were doing that. If we want to maybe think about some of the skills involved in our own work, maybe it's for us to be brave enough that we're going to survive even if our parents don't approve of this decision. And it helps if you aren't dependent in any way on them,
Yep.
so that you could just be like, I am what I am.
Popeye.
And that's just it. And even if our parents are not thrilled with us, they aren't in a position anymore where they can harm us in the same way that they were able to when we were little.
And a shout out to all parents: accept your kids for who they are, regardless of any part of their lives, who they love, what their gender is, how they identify, what they
That's
do
right.
for a living, what they choose to do with their life, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, mostly themselves, but also others. Support them.
That would be huge. Could you imagine a scenario in which we felt like our parents, or if you're, the kids, if you were feeling as a kid, an adult kid, celebrated instead of tolerated, or if you felt like your parent was somehow like, oh my God, I actually love who you are. I had a really hard time adjusting to this move you made that I didn't approve of, but I was wrong. I'm so proud of you. Look at you. That would change a lot of things.
It would.
Doug, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you. Look at you. Look at you in orange. You've made it, my friend. Okay, next one, second to last one. If you find yourself trying to manage your partner's emotions, it could be a clear indicator that you had an emotionally abusive parent. Because if the parents are struggling to regulate their own emotions and then we're blaming ourselves, we become parentified and we try to manage our parents' emotional state. And then we find ourselves in these relationships where we feel like we have to walk on eggshells and be perfect and sort of trigger proof our partner's world to make sure that they're okay, because we're only okay if they're okay, right? It's like the high functioning codependent piece. So even just to realize my partner can have their emotions, I'm going to be okay. And also, hopefully, you haven't found yourself in a relationship with someone who gets that dysregulated if they're upset, hopefully.
It's really interesting as you were talking, and I was thinking about this concept, what came to mind for me is people who get really jealous of their person going out with friends or going out with other people. When you talk about like trying to manage your partner's emotions, I think
Oh,
about behavior
yes.
too, right? Like I think about what it means to be able to be generous and secure in your attachment, which is not something you experience as a child if you grew up with an emotionally abusive or neglectful parent for that matter. So if we are secure in our attachment, we're allowing our partners, our friends to have other friends, to have their own interests, to go on trips, to do other things outside of
That's
us
right.
that don't always involve us, and we don't necessarily feel insecure about that. So I think that discomfort with like generosity and that ability to like separate from someone and know that you are going to be okay is not a soothing experience you had from that emotionally abusive or neglectful parent. So I take a look at, again, I find myself people who try to, and the word control came up too. Like, when you try to manage your partner's emotions, that's about control. And if you can control them, that's your way maladaptively, I should say, of trying to make sure that you don't feel discomfort and you put that on someone else to take care of. And
Oh
it's
God,
really your
that's
own
so
work
well put.
to take care of yourself.
But I also I love that you connected that to not just managing your partner's emotions, but managing their behavior
Yep.
so that you're not feeling anxious.
Yep.
And if anywhere in your head you think that that's justified, it's not. And in fact, we create that which we fear the most, right? So if
Yep.
you're treating your partner like a criminal, or like you're sure they're going to cheat, or you're sure they're going to abandon, or you're sure they're going to whatever it is, you're probably more likely to create that dynamic because what you're creating is someone who feels like a prisoner.
And you're pushing them away. You're
That's
making
right.
it impossible for them to feel comfortable. And I've seen so many people do as much as they can to affirm the other person and let them know they're not cheating, they're not doing anything bad, they're not whatever. It's not your responsibility. It's okay to affirm that by giving those verbalizations, but it's up to the person who is struggling with letting that person have their own identity and life, and not control or possess. I've seen it happen so many times where people are possessive of their partner. I have felt possessed at times. I have probably felt possessive, and it's an insecurity that needs to be managed.
I love the way you said that. You say possessed, like possessed. It's very cute.
Thank you.
All of it reminds me of, and I haven't read Mel Robbins' new book, but Let Them, just the concept.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
and I've heard her talk about it, and I just love the concept of like, you can't control how other people love you, but you let them. Like, if they're not going to show up for you in a certain way, or if they're going to cheat on you, or
And in the
you gotta let
famous
them.
words of Oprah, when somebody shows you who they are, watch,
Listen to
listen and
them.
observe it and take it in. Last implication that we're going to talk about today related to this concept of having a neglectful or abusive, I'm adding neglectful now too, abusive parent situation, is that we tend to replicate those systems. And part of it, and I've done this as well, we find someone, I remember I was in this really awful relationship that made me constantly feel anxious. Like I never felt like I was getting what I needed. I never felt like I was enough. I got criticized a lot. And I'm like, in retrospect, I did everything I could to please this person and to give him everything that he didn't deserve. And the reality was I was trying to please my mother and I was trying to replicate. I
Oh my
remember
God.
my therapist within like 2 times said, I think this person is maybe similar to your mother. I'm like, no,
Did you never
that's
come
not
back?
it.
Yeah.
No, I came back and this therapist was just brilliant. Thank you, Bill, for all your time. He has recently become deceased, unfortunately. And that was really hard, by the way. I learned a lot about when someone you relied on for support is no longer available. It's like a little shocking
Well,
and jarring.
especially if you've had a terrible childhood and
100%.
you had
He
to
was-
seek out those adults.
He was such an amazing person for me. I really appreciated it. But I was toxically repeating patterns. I was trying to find love from someone who resembled my parent who could not give that to me in a
That's right.
consistent way. And it was really unfortunate. And I think so many people do this and it's an easy call. Now, having done my work, I don't do that in my personal relationships. I don't rescue people anymore at my expense, which is codependency. I do tend to listen to myself now. Like, am I going to get what I need? Do I get what I need? Can I ask for what I need and have it be supported? That's great. But if not, you're repeating a pattern where you're not getting available emotional, physical validation for who you are. Everyone should be in a relationship where they feel loved and regarded and safe to do so.
Do you know what good old Freud used to call that?
Penis envy.
Oedipus complex. No, it's repetition compulsion, where we're playing out our original family of origin in every person we're attracted to and meet. And we're always trying to master that horrible, unhealthy, abusive dynamic. But then if you actually turn the bad dynamic good, it won't scratch that itch. It's like, what am I thinking of? Chicken pox. It's like you can't ever really scratch that itch because it's an unhealthy need. So once we start getting healthier, we attract people that are healthier. We don't have to turn somebody who's emotionally abusive into someone who's less abusive.
And really, it means listening to yourself. Like when you start to feel, and particularly the word anxious comes up. So anxious is an attachment style as well. I had an anxious attachment style in that relationship that I'm referring to. I never felt good enough. I was constantly waiting for him to contact me back or text me back. And 9 times out of 10, I was angry and rageful and scolding and shaming and blaming and demanding and all those sorts of things. I should have walked the first week, which, by the way, lovely friends that I have all knew it right away. And I just kept going and going and going.
Yeah, we don't
thinking I
fear.
could finally find pull blood from a turnip and recover from that bad attachment I had with my parents' system.
Didn't
work.
It's inevitable. But
Yeah.
we do our work and we grow, and then we're attracted to hot Christian guys on a bus.
Not
Full
me.
circle.
That's not where I went.
Hot Christian guys?
I
No, actually, you like them Jewish.
as I was just actually talking to
or
Talia about
Italian or Mediterranean or
that dude that I just
I
showed
know.
you on Instagram who cooks with his French dog with
actually it's a Chinese dog. It's a pug.
is it?
A Chinese palace dog, because that's what I have. I'm pug-cessed. Pug-cessed. Friends, we love you. We hope you got something out of this episode. So it's an explanation, not an excuse, but now you are armed and ready to have healthier relationships.
I'll also say that this work is not easy. It took me years and years and years. And I will tell you that grief was part of my process. Like I've referenced before, I would walk up the stairs to my therapist's office in Loring Park here in the Twin Cities and just start crying. And then I would cry for like an hour. And I did that for probably a year and barely got anything out because I was grieving and grieving and grieving and grieving the loss of a childhood that was safe and secure. And finally, when I got through it, and I remember the day that I'm like, I didn't cry today. And I'm like, progress. And I got through it.
That's why we do what we do.
It was huge,
It's
huge,
so
huge.
powerful.
Yep.
And then you're forever changed and you can go out into the world feeling like you finally processed.
So, I actually, and not to get, obviously this is very personal, but I ritualized it by buying myself a ring that reminds me that I love myself. And equally so, it's on the finger that I would give to anyone who didn't treat me well again. So.
I never knew this.
Yeah.
I love it.
Really?
I think we should all do that.
I love the ritual. I love the reminder that I married myself after I left that relationship and promised never to do it again.
And we can all do that in just today is the day that we've decided that we're no longer going to put up with bullshit.
And give yourself grace.
That's
give yourself
right.
time. Give yourself patience. Growth is hard. It takes sometimes years and years and years of therapy. Don't be afraid. Keep going.
That's
it's hard
right.
work.
It's right. And when you come out
Yep.
on the other end, you can wear orange and
And wear a ring on your middle finger.
I love that so much. You guys find us on social media, Instagram, We're Not Fine, douglasljensen with an E-N, Dr. Talia Jackson. We've got some great TikTok videos, but mostly if you're not watching us on YouTube, you really should be.
It's so interesting. People have oftentimes said, I wonder what they, I had somebody say that about you. Like, I wonder what she looks like. I'm like, well, watch. Because our voices are ones that people don't know what we look like when
Really?
we talk.
I think I look like my voice.
I think,
I
I don't even know what we match in terms of our voices and ourselves. But also, we're notfine.com. Go to we're notfine.com. We have a really great person who does our website, who you can
His
ask any
name is
questions.
Alex.
Alex,
He's fantastic.
who is moving closer to us as we speak.
Literally driving to Minnesota right this second with his wife. I cannot believe this is happening.
I know. I'm so excited. Anyway, and now Dig, you need to, if you're listening to this, which
Yes.
I'm assuming you are, you need to move
Although
as well.
she lives right next door to a guy with like 3 teeth that makes his own moonshine. I don't know if we can.
I think we
offer
can order from
anything.
him. I think we can find a way. Anyway, we're notfine.com. We welcome any questions, suggestions, comments on what we've talked about today or other episodes. We welcome the opportunity to hear from you.
Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.